When we read, we have different voices. First, there's our reading voice, and our reading voice reads the words on the page. Then we have our thinking voice. It is our thinking voice that we hear in our head. That voice is when our metacognition is working. So we need to learn to listen to that reading voice carefully. And then there is that distracting voice. We need to watch out for that distracting voice, because that distracting voice will interrupt our thinking, and so we need to turn it off. We also need to be careful about that distracting voice, because we don't want to be off task or interfere with others. So we're going to be focusing on our thinking voice. If we're paying attention to that thinking voice when we read, it's helping us understand. And one of the things that our thinking voice often does is it asks questions, or it helps us work on answering questions, ones that others may ask of us, or ones that we have ourselves. Here's a questioning song I have. Asking questions, use my microphone, ask many questions. Who, what, when, where, why, how, if, and I wonder. Asking questions. So, think about listening to that thinking voice in your head as it is asking questions. So I'm going to read a story called Fly Away Home. It's one of my favorites. It's not what you might expect, and it's filled with opportunities for you to ask questions about a fictional text. So be sure to record the title. And as you're listening, see if you can come up with a question that starts with each one of these words. Who, where, when, what, why, and how. You're welcome to come up with more. And if you do that, you can put them on Post-it notes. So at this point, you're going to need to pause this video and then open up the reading of Fly Away Home. After you listen to the story, take time to share some of your questions with each other. Then we'll move on to the next part. This is Fly Away Home by Eve Bunting and illustrated by Ronald Himmler. My dad and I live in an airport. That's because we don't have a home and the airport is better than the streets. We are careful to not get caught. Mr. Slocum and Mr. Vile were caught last night. 10 green bottles hanging on the wall, they sang. They were as loud as 2 moose bellowing. Dad says they broke the first rule of living here. Don't get noticed. Dad and I try not to get noticed. We stay among the crowds. We change airlines. Delta, TWA, Northwest. We love them all, Dad says.
He and I wear blue jeans and blue t-shirts and blue jackets. We each have a zippered bag with a change of blue clothes. Not to be noticed is to look like nobody at all. Once we saw a woman pushing a metal cart full of stuff. She wore a long, dirty coat, and she lay down across a row of seats in front of Continental Gate 6. The cart, the dirty coat, the lying down were all noticeable. Security moved her out real fast. Dad and I sleep sitting up. We use different airport areas. Where are we tonight? I ask. Dad checks his notebook. Alaska Air, he says, over in the other terminal. That's okay. We like to walk. We know some of the airport regulars by name and by sight. There's Idaho Joe and Annie Franny and Marsman, but we don't sit together. Sitting together will get you noticed faster than anything, Dad says. Everything in the airport is on the move. Passengers, pilots, flight attendants, cleaners with their brooms. Jets roar in close to the windows. Other jets roar out. Luggage bounces down chutes. Escalators glide up and down, disappearing under floors. Everyone's going somewhere except Dad and me. We stay. Once a little brown bird got into the main terminal and couldn't get out. It fluttered in the high, hollow spaces. It threw itself at the glass, fell panting on the floor, flew to a tall metal girder, and perched there, exhausted. Don't stop trying, I told it silently. Don't. You can get out. For days, the bird flew around, dragging one wing. And then it found the instant when a sliding door was open and slipped through. I watched it rise. Its wings seemed okay. Fly, bird, I whispered. Fly away home. Though I couldn't hear it, I knew it was singing. Nothing made me as happy as that bird. The airport's busy and noisy even at night. Dad and I sleep anyway. When it gets quiet between 2 and 4 a.m., we wake up. Dead time, Dad says. Almost no flights coming in or out. At dead time, there aren't many people around, so we're extra careful. In the mornings, Dad and I wash up in one of the bathrooms, and he shaves. The bathrooms are crowded, no matter how early, and that's the way we like it. Strangers talk to strangers. Where did you get in from? 3 hours. Our flight was delayed. Man, am I bushed. Dad and I, we don't talk to anyone. We buy donuts and milk for breakfast at one of the cafeterias, standing in line with our red trays. Sometimes Dad gets me a carton of juice. On the weekends, Dad takes the bus to work. He's a janitor in an office in the city. The bus fares $1 each way. On those days, Mrs. Medina looks out for me. The Medinas live in the airport too. Grandma, Mrs. Medina, and Denny, who's my friend. He and I collect rented luggage carts that people have left outside and return them for 50 cents each. If the crowds are big and safe, we offer to carry bags. Get this one for you, lady? It looks heavy. Or, can I call you a cab? Denny's real good at calling cabs. That's because he's 7 already. Sometimes passengers don't tip. Then Denny whispers, stingy. But he doesn't whisper too loud. The Medinas understand that it's dangerous to be noticed. When Dad comes home for work, he buys hamburgers for us in the Medinas. That's to pay them for watching out for me. If Denny and I have had a good day, we treat for pie. But I've stopped doing that. I save my money in a shoe. Will we ever have our own apartment again? I asked Dad. I'd like it to be the way it was before Mom died. Maybe we will, he says, if I can find more work. If we can save some money. He rubs my head. It's nice right here, though, isn't it, Andrew? It's warm, it's safe, and the price is right. But I know he's trying all the time to find us a place. He takes newspapers from the trash baskets and makes pencil circles around letters and numbers. Then he goes to the phones. When he comes back, he looks sad and angry. I know he's been calling about an apartment. I know the rents are too high for us. I'm saving money too, I tell him. I lift one foot and point to my shoe. Dad smiles. Attaboy. If we get a place, you and your dad can come live with us, Denny says. And if we get a place, you and your mom and your grandma can come live with us, I say. Yeah, we shake on it. That's going to be so great. After next summer, Dad says I have to start school. How? I ask. I don't know, but it's important. We'll work it out. Denny's mom says he can wait for a while, but Dad says I can't wait. Sometimes I watch people meeting people. We missed you. It's so good to be home. Sometimes I get mad and I want to run at them and push them and shout, why do you have homes when we don't? What makes you so special? That would get us noticed, all right. Sometimes I just want to cry. I think Dad and I will be here forever. And then I remember the bird. It took a while, but a door opened. And when the bird left, when it flew free, I know it was singing.
Now that you're looking back at your questions, were some of the questions easier to answer than others? Let's consider. A question where the answer is easy to find is something we can call on the surface. An on the surface question asks for answers that you can find on the surface or right in the text. These are the easy ones to confirm because we can find the answer right there on the page. Now, some questions get a little bit trickier and go below the surface. These questions ask you to really dive into that metacognition or your thinking. You need to use the text for clues, but then you need to mix in your thinking. These can be challenging. If you can find answers right in the text, we call that explicit. It means that it's stated clear and in detail with no room for confusion or doubt. So, in other words, you can find the answer to a question right in the text, and we say that it is literally stated. Often, you can answer questions like this using exact words from the text. However, sometimes we really have the tough ones. When we get these below the surface questions, we've got to use a combination of clues in the text and of our thinking. We know this is when real reading takes place. In order to answer the question, we have to infer. We might call this inferring, or we refer to it as making an inference. Here's an inferring song to remind you of what that means. Because when you infer, you're figuring something out using clues you know and clues in the text. In other words, you are looking for clues and using your schema. Read a text and look for clues. Connect and use my schema. INFER. I-N-F-E-R, I-N-F-E-R, and make meaning when inferring. So when I infer or go below the surface, I like to think of a submarine, and that's why I use that. Of course, we can have questions that are, in fact, on the surface, questions that are below the surface, or questions that can be anywhere in between, depending on how much work we need to put into it. And that is when thinking runs along what we call a continuum. A continuum is a range or series of things that are slightly different from each other and that exist between two different possibilities. So your thinking can range from very obviously on the surface at one end to really deep below the surface at the other end. Now go back and consider the questions you came up with for Fly Away Home. If you asked a question such as, who were the characters? And it's really easy to answer because it's on the surface, then note that this is on the surface. But perhaps if you ask a question like, why were they living in an airport? The answer is not stated. You need to use clues to infer. And that is definitely going deeper and below the surface. If you have time, please discuss your thoughts with the other people in your group.